He had everything: the voice, the looks, the hits that topped the charts across Mexico. Johnny Dinamo was competing with legends like Cesar Costa and Enrique Guzman, packing theaters and driving teenage girls wild. And then, without warning, he was gone. Not retired, not faded, gone. What happened to the singer who seemed destined for superstardom? Today, we're digging into the rise, the fall, and the mystery surrounding one of Mexico's most talented and troubled stars. Before we get into Johnny's story, let me paint you a picture of the Mexico he grew up in. The 1960s and 70s were wild times south of the border. You had traditional Mexican music still dominating the older crowd, Jose Alfredo Jimenez and Lola Beltran filling the airwaves with rancheras and ballads. But the kids, they wanted something different. They wanted rebellion. They wanted rock and roll. The Blanquita Theater in Mexico City became ground zero for this cultural war. You'd have performers like Tongalele doing these scandalous dance routines that had parents clutching their pearls and teenagers sneaking out to watch. The youth movement was exploding, influenced by what was happening in the United States with the hippies, the British invasion, all of it. Mexican teenagers weren't content to just listen to their parents' music anymore. Radio stations that had resisted these new sounds started giving in. Record labels saw dollar signs. Suddenly, you had this explosion of young Mexican artists doing Spanish covers of American and British hits, blending rock with traditional Mexican styles. Names like Angelica Maria, Alberto Vasquez, Los Rebeldes del Rock started popping up everywhere, and right in the middle of all that energy and chaos was a kid from Coahuila who was about to become Johnny Dinamo. His real name was Manuel Humberto Gonzalez Galindo, born in 1945 in Piedras Negras, a border town in Coahuila. From what family members have said, Johnny was a handful from day one. Hyperactive doesn't even begin to cover it. He was the kid who couldn't sit still, who drove his parents absolutely crazy with his endless energy. He had at least one sister, maybe more siblings, and the whole family knew this boy needed an outlet before he bounced off the walls permanently. Now, Johnny's family wasn't poor, but they weren't rich either. They were working people who wanted better opportunities for their kids. So when Johnny was around 12 or 13, they made the move that changed everything. They packed up and headed to Mexico City, settling in the Escandon neighborhood right near Condesa. For a restless kid from a border town, Mexico City must have felt like landing on another planet. Here's where Johnny's life really starts to take shape. He's hitting adolescence in the heart of Mexico's music revolution. He's watching these young artists blow up, seeing kids not much older than him becoming stars, and something clicks. He'd always loved music, but now it became an obsession. He told himself, and apparently told anyone who would listen, I can do this. I can be famous in rock. So he threw himself into music lessons. By 14 years old, Johnny could play guitar fluently and had developed this smooth, captivating singing voice. And here's the thing about Johnny that set him apart early on. He didn't just practice in his bedroom, he went straight into performing. There were these concert cafes all over Mexico City at the time, especially around Condesa and Chapultepec. Think of them like early karaoke bars, but with live bands and a much cooler atmosphere. No alcohol for the kids, just milkshakes and cappuccinos, but the music was real. These places gave young performers their first taste of an audience, and Johnny, at just 14 years old, started working these cafes night after night. People loved him immediately. There was something about his voice, his presence, even at that young age. He'd perform his set, then stick around and jam with other musicians in these informal sessions. He was networking before he even knew what networking was. The other musicians liked him, respected his talent, and pretty soon a group of them approached him about forming a band. Now, here's where a lot of people get the story wrong. There's this myth that Johnny started with a group called the Fanatics. That's not true. His first real band was called the Sleepwalkers. I love that name, by the way. Very 1960s, very mysterious. Johnny and his bandmates would rehearse all over the city in neighborhoods like Romero Rubio and Santa Maria la Rivera, just grinding it out, perfecting their sound. The Sleepwalkers started getting noticed. They graduated from the small cafes to slightly bigger venues, including a place called the Wise Frog, which was apparently the spot for young music lovers in early 1960s Mexico City. By the time Johnny turned 16, around 1961, he'd outgrown the Sleepwalkers. His ambition was already bigger than what that band could offer. This is where Johnny Dinamo really starts to emerge. He's 17, 18 years old now, and he's watching guys like Enrique Guzman absolutely dominate the scene. Guzman was the guy. He had the hits, the looks, the charisma. He was Mexico's answer to Elvis, and Johnny looked at him and thought, I can compete with that. So Johnny went solo, adopted the stage name Johnny Dynamo, and started recording. And here's the thing that's remarkable. He wasn't wrong about himself. His first singles started getting radio play. Songs like Palabras and Muchachita weren't just regional hits. They were competing with established stars for chart positions. Johnny Dynamo, this kid from Piedras Negras who'd been playing cafes just a few years earlier, was suddenly being mentioned in the same breath as Cesar Costa and Enrique Guzman. The mid-1960s were Johnny's golden years. He was young, talented, and hungry. He had the teen idol looks, the voice, and most importantly, he had the energy. That hyperactivity that drove his parents crazy as a kid? On stage, it became electric charisma. He'd perform with this intensity that drew people in. Teenage girls screamed for him the same way they screamed for Guzman. He was booking bigger venues, selling records, living the dream. But success in the Mexican entertainment industry in the 1960s came with complications. Record labels controlled everything. Radio play wasn't always about talent. It was about who you knew, who you paid, what deals you made. Artists got locked into contracts that gave them pennies while executives got rich. And for a young guy like Johnny who'd come up fast and probably didn't have the best advisors, it was easy to get taken advantage of. There are reports, though details are hard to confirm, that Johnny started having problems with his label. Money disputes, creative differences, the usual music industry nightmare. He wanted more control, more money, more respect. They wanted him to shut up and sing what they told him to sing. This is purely speculation, but people who knew him have suggested that Johnny's personality, that same restless, hyperactive energy, didn't handle being controlled very well. Then there's the personal side. Johnny was living the rock star life in his early 20s. The parties, the women, the lifestyle that came with fame in that era. Mexico City's entertainment scene could be rough. There were stories about artists getting involved with the wrong people, drugs becoming a problem, personal relationships falling apart. We don't have confirmation about all the details of Johnny's private life, but people who were around at the time have hinted that he was struggling. By the late 1960s, something had changed. Johnny's releases became less frequent. He wasn't on the radio as much. His public appearances dropped off. Some people thought he was just taking a break, that he'd be back. But the break kept getting longer. And then came the part that nobody really understands. Johnny Dinamo disappeared. Not in the I'm taking time off way, in the nobody knows where he went way. He stopped recording, stopped performing, stopped being seen in public. It's like he walked off the stage one day and never came back. Now, here's where the story gets murky, and honestly, frustrating, because there are multiple versions of what happened next. Some people say Johnny left the music business voluntarily, that he was burned out and disillusioned. Others claim he was forced out, that he'd made enemies in the industry who made sure he couldn't work. There are darker rumors too, stories about addiction, about mental health struggles, about threats. One account suggests Johnny might have returned to Piedras Negras or somewhere else in northern Mexico. Another version has him staying in Mexico City, but living a completely different life, away from music entirely. The problem is, nobody has definitive proof of any of these stories. What we do know is that Johnny Dinamo, the singer, ceased to exist. The music stopped. The man who'd competed with legends, who'd had hit records and screaming fans, just vanished from public life. Here's what makes this story even more tragic. Johnny wasn't old when he disappeared. He was in his 20s, maybe early 30s at most. These should have been his prime years. He should have evolved as an artist, maybe transitioned from teen idol to mature performer like some of his contemporaries did. Instead, his career just ended. And the silence around his disappearance is deafening. In an era where Mexican entertainment magazines covered every scandal and rumor, where radio DJs gossiped about artists constantly, Johnny's exit was barely discussed. It's almost like the industry wanted to forget he existed. That silence is suspicious. It suggests either Johnny wanted complete privacy and somehow managed to achieve it, or someone made sure the story stayed quiet. The few people who worked with Johnny during his peak years and have been interviewed since offer vague responses. They remember him fondly, talk about his talent, but when asked what happened, they get evasive. Things were complicated back then, they'll say. Or, the music business was different, but they never give real answers. What happened to Manuel Humberto Gonzalez Galindo? Did he live a long, quiet life away from fame? Did the pressures of the industry and whatever personal demons he was fighting consume him? We don't know. There's no public record of his death, no obituary, no final chapter to the story. He's one of those artists who exists in this strange limbo, remembered by older fans, forgotten by younger generations, his music occasionally rediscovered, but the man himself, a ghost. The tragedy of Johnny Dinamo isn't just that his career ended early, it's that he deserved better. He had real talent. His songs still hold up today. If he'd come along 20 years later with better support systems, better contracts, maybe better mental health resources, who knows what he could have achieved? Instead, he's a footnote in Mexican rock history, a whatever happened to story that nobody can fully answer. So what do you think happened to Johnny Dinamo? Do you think he walked away on his own terms, or was he forced out? If you're from Mexico or your parents listen to music from that era, drop a comment and let me know if you've heard any stories about him. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten music history, make sure you subscribe because we've got more lost legends coming your way.